It was just past midnight when Ethan's headlights began to dim on that lonely stretch of highway. The stars overhead were brilliant, scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, but Ethan wasn't in the mood to appreciate them. He was 26, an artist with dreams bigger than his bank account, and this road trip was supposed to be his chance to clear his head and find new inspiration. Instead, he found himself stranded as his 10-year-old sedan sputtered and died, the dashboard lights flickering out with one final, pathetic flash. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of distant wildlife and Ethan's frustrated sighs as he tried repeatedly to restart the engine. "Come on," he muttered, turning the key again and again. Each attempt met with nothing but a hollow clicking sound. The battery was dead, that much was clear, and Ethan was miles from the nearest town, with no cell service to call for help. He slumped back in his seat, running his hands through his dark, tousled hair, wondering how long he'd have to wait until morning when someone might drive by. The night air was growing colder by the minute, seeping through the thin fabric of his jacket. Ethan had always been the prepared one, the planner, but somehow he'd neglected to pack emergency supplies for this trip. No jumper cables, no flashlight, just his portfolio of drawings and a duffel bag of clothes. He was contemplating whether to start walking when a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Ethan's heart raced with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, a stranger could be salvation or danger. He watched as an old pickup truck pulled up behind him, its engine rumbling to a stop. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, illuminated briefly by the interior light of the truck. "Car trouble." The voice was deep and warm, carrying easily through the still night air. As the stranger approached, Ethan could make out more details: broad shoulders, a confident stride, and a face that, even in the dim light, was undeniably handsome. "Yeah, battery's dead," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual despite his growing awareness of how vulnerable he was. "I'm Ethan, by the way." "Jake," the stranger said, extending a hand that was calloused and strong, the hand of someone who worked with them. "Mind if I take a look?" Jake was a mechanic, as it turned out. 30 years old with sun-kissed skin and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, popping the hood of Ethan's car and examining the battery with a small flashlight he produced from his pocket. "Well, your battery's definitely shot," Jake announced after a few minutes. "And I hate to tell you this, but I don't have jumper cables with me. Left them at the garage where I work." He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Next town's about 40 miles away. Nothing's going to be open at this hour anyway." Ethan's heart sank. "So I'm stuck here until morning?" Jake nodded, but there was something in his expression, a sparkle in his eyes, perhaps, that suggested he didn't consider this a tragedy. "Looks like it. But hey, you're not alone anymore. I was heading back from a friend's place. Nowhere I need to be until tomorrow afternoon." There was something about Jake that put Ethan at ease, despite the circumstances. Maybe it was his easy smile or the way he spoke, straightforward but kind. Either way, Ethan found himself grateful for the company. "I appreciate you stopping," Ethan said sincerely. Most people would have just driven by. Jake shrugged, as if helping strangers in the middle of the night was the most natural thing in the world. "I've been stranded before. Know how much it sucks." He glanced up at the sky, where the stars continued their silent vigil. "It's getting colder. We should probably get somewhere warmer than standing out here." Ethan hadn't noticed how much the temperature had dropped until Jake mentioned it. Now, he couldn't ignore the chill that had settled into his bones. "I guess we could sit in my car. The heater won't work, obviously, but it's better than nothing." Jake seemed to consider this for a moment. Actually, the back seat would be warmer, more insulated, and he hesitated, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. Body heat helps. Two people generate more warmth than one alone. There was something in the way Jake said it, slightly hesitant, almost shy, that made Ethan's pulse quicken. He wasn't imagining the attraction between them, the subtle current of electricity that had been there from the moment Jake stepped out of his truck. "That makes sense," Ethan agreed, trying to sound casual. "Scientific, even." Jake laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed to chase away some of the night's chill. "Exactly. Just basic survival skills." They moved to the back seat of Ethan's car, which was surprisingly spacious once they cleared away Ethan's art supplies and travel bag. At first, they sat with a respectable distance between them, but as the minutes ticked by and the temperature continued to drop, that distance gradually decreased. "So, you're an artist?" Jake asked, nodding toward the portfolio they'd moved to the front seat. Ethan nodded, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. "Trying to be. I do illustrations mostly, book covers, magazine pieces. This trip was supposed to help me find new inspiration." He laughed softly, though I didn't expect it to come in the form of a car breakdown. "Sometimes the best things happen when plans fall apart," Jake replied, his voice thoughtful. "I was supposed to be a lawyer, you know. Had the acceptance letter to law school and everything. Then my dad got sick, and I took over his garage temporarily. Discovered I loved working with my hands, solving mechanical puzzles. Never looked back." As they talked, Ethan learned that Jake was more than just a mechanic. He was a dreamer too, in his own way. He spoke about restoring vintage motorcycles, about the cross-country trip he'd taken last summer, about the small house he was slowly renovating. There was passion in his voice, a zest for life that Ethan found infectious. "What about you?" Jake asked, turning those intense blue eyes on Ethan. "What drives you to create art?" It was a question Ethan had been asked many times before, usually by well-meaning relatives who couldn't understand why he'd chosen such an uncertain path. But coming from Jake, it felt different, genuine, interested. "I've always seen the world differently," Ethan explained, surprised by his own openness. "Colors seem more vibrant to me, shapes more meaningful. When I draw or paint, I'm trying to show others what I see. The beauty in ordinary things, the stories hidden in plain sight." Jake nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. "I get that. It's like when I'm working on an engine. There's a kind of poetry to how all the parts fit together, how something so mechanical can have such soul." The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. As the night deepened, so did their connection. Ethan found himself sharing things he rarely talked about: his fear of never making it as an artist, the pressure he felt to pursue something more stable, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied his creative life. "It's hard for people to understand," he admitted. "They see the finished pieces, but not the struggle behind them. The doubt, the rejection letters, the nights spent wondering if I'm fooling myself." Jake's hand found his in the darkness, warm and reassuring. "I think that's true of most passions," he said softly. "People see the end result, not the journey. But the journey's where the real living happens." The touch of Jake's hand sent a current of warmth through Ethan's body. He was acutely aware of how close they were sitting now, their shoulders pressed together, thighs touching. The car had grown warmer, not from any heater but from their shared presence, their mingled breath fogging the windows slightly. "You know," Jake said, his voice lower now, more intimate, "I've driven this road hundreds of times and never once stopped. Something told me to tonight, though. When I saw your car, I just knew I needed to pull over." Ethan turned to face him, their faces now just inches apart. "I'm glad you did," he whispered. There was a moment of perfect stillness, a heartbeat of anticipation, and then Jake leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when Ethan responded, it deepened into something more urgent, more hungry. Jake's hand came up to cup Ethan's face, his touch tender despite the passion of their kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Ethan felt as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. Here, in the middle of nowhere, with a dead battery and no plan, he'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. "I wasn't expecting this," Jake murmured, his thumb tracing the line of Ethan's jaw. "But I'm not complaining." Ethan laughed softly. "Me neither. Though I have to say, as far as first dates go, this is pretty unique." "Is that what this is? A date?" Jake's eyes sparkled with amusement and something warmer, more meaningful. "Well, we've covered life stories, shared our dreams, and now we're making out in the back seat of my car. Sounds like a date to me." Jake's laughter filled the small space, genuine and infectious. "When you put it that way, it does check all the boxes." As the night wore on, they talked more, kissed more, shared more. Jake told Ethan about growing up in a small town, about coming out to his parents at 19 and being met with acceptance that surprised even him. Ethan spoke about his own journey, about the freedom he'd found in art and the struggle to reconcile his creative ambitions with practical realities. You know what I think? Jake said, his arm now wrapped comfortably around Ethan's shoulders. I think you're going to make it. There's something special about your perspective, even just hearing you talk about your work. I'd love to see it sometime. How about tomorrow? Ethan suggested, surprising himself with his boldness. After we get my car started, maybe we could grab breakfast, and I could show you my portfolio. Jake's smile was answer enough, but he nodded anyway. I'd like that. A lot. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have known each other for years rather than hours. Outside, the night was giving way to the first hints of dawn, the sky lightening almost imperceptibly along the eastern horizon. You know, Ethan said thoughtfully, if my battery hadn't died, we never would have met. Jake considered this, his fingers absently playing with Ethan's hair. Maybe, or maybe we would have, just differently. I like to think some people are meant to find each other, one way or another. It was a surprisingly romantic sentiment from someone who dealt in the concrete realities of engines and mechanics, but it resonated with Ethan. He'd never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but there was something about this night, about meeting Jake, that felt significant in a way he couldn't quite articulate. As the first true light of dawn began to filter through the windows, Jake stirred beside him. I should probably see about getting your car started, he said, though he made no immediate move to leave the warmth of their shared space. Ethan nodded reluctantly. I suppose real life has to intrude eventually. Jake turned to him, his expression suddenly serious. This is real life, Ethan. What happened between us tonight? That's as real as it gets. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside Ethan. He leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to Jake's lips. You're right, and I don't want it to end when my car starts. It doesn't have to, Jake replied, his eyes holding a promise. In fact, I know this great little diner about 20 miles from here. Best pancakes you've ever tasted. Perfect place for a second date. A second date, huh? Ethan couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. I like the sound of that. With reluctance, they finally exited the back seat, the morning air crisp and cool against their skin. Jake retrieved jumper cables from his truck. He'd had them all along, Ethan realized with amused suspicion, and within minutes, Ethan's car was rumbling back to life. You could have gotten my car started hours ago, couldn't you? Ethan asked, trying to sound accusatory but failing to hide his smile. Jake's expression was the perfect picture of innocence, though his eyes danced with mischief. I have no idea what you're talking about. The cables were buried under some tools. Took me all night to find them. Uh-huh, Ethan replied, not believing him for a second but finding he didn't mind the deception. After all, it had led to one of the most memorable nights of his life. Standing by their respective vehicles, ready to form a convoy to the diner Jake had mentioned, Ethan felt a strange mixture of emotions. Excitement for what might come next, gratitude for what had already happened, and a peculiar sense of rightness, as if some puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing had finally clicked into place. Ready? Jake called from his truck, his smile visible even from a distance. Ethan nodded, starting his engine with newfound appreciation for the simple miracle of a working battery. As he pulled onto the highway behind Jake's truck, the rising sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and pink, he couldn't help but think that sometimes breakdowns led to breakthroughs. Sometimes, being stranded was just the universe's way of helping you find your way. And as the miles rolled by, leading them toward pancakes and possibilities, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of their story. A story that started with a dead car battery and a long night in the back seat, but would continue long after the sun had fully risen. A story of chance encounters and deliberate choices, of roadside assistance and hearts finding their home. The road stretched out before them, full of promise and unknown adventures. And for once in his life, Ethan wasn't worried about the destination. With Jake leading the way, the journey itself was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Total _char_count. 18,236.